WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on air. We're coming to you from Star Communications, Channel 16, WCLN Radio. We're pleased to be with you each and every week at 2:30. Now doing this for around 9 years. We want to thank our guest, John Marone, from last week for the Securities Division, the Secretary of State's office. Talked about a number of issues that were important to you as it relates to your money. We're transitioning with the show this week, and we're talking about something that is not only on point, but something critical and crucial, and it is now as National Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and who better to have somebody that's been in this business for a decade or more now and literally is all in, and that's Pam Strickland. Pam, thank you for taking time to be with us today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Human trafficking, just saying the name causes us to have a little bit of skin shiver, if you will, and concern. Tell us how you got into this, and not only that, but the leadership role that you've taken, particularly here in Eastern North Carolina, with human trafficking.
Sure. So, like most people, I'd never heard of human trafficking. I was busy, married, had a son, active in my church, was not looking for something else to do. And I was invited to go to a missions conference with a group from my church. Did that, and the keynote speaker at the conference was Gary Haugen, and he is the founder of International Justice Mission, which is a huge global nonprofit that works on a variety of human rights issues, the most prominent of which is human trafficking. And he was talking about it, and that was interesting, but then he showed footage from a rescue that his group had done in Asia. And so it was these tiny little girls in a brothel in Asia. And of course, they were terrified. They didn't know they were being rescued. They just knew scary things were happening. And I sat there, this was in 2006, and I just sat there thinking, this cannot be happening in the year 2006. That we have families selling their little girls into a brothel, and we have adult men going into these brothels and paying to abuse these little girls. I thought, this can't be happening, and I felt very much called to do something about that. And as luck or providence would have it, immediately after returning home from that mission trip, when I'm trying to figure out, from that conference, I'm trying to figure out, what can I do? What can little old me in Farmville, North Carolina do? I heard about a mission trip that was going to a country called Moldova in Eastern Europe. And the purpose of the mission trip was to address the issue of human trafficking there, because it's a tiny little country, very little economic opportunity, and it, for a period of time, was pretty much ground zero for sex trafficking in Eastern Europe. So I went with the group there. We went to orphanages. We call them orphanages. The local people call them basically state-run boarding schools. These are schools where students live whose parents have left the country looking for work, whose parents are, for whatever reason, unable to take care of them. And so we go into these orphanages to talk to the young people, but also to the faculty, the teachers, about the issue of human trafficking in an effort to hopefully prevent these young people from becoming victims. And so I was very moved by that experience. I felt called to actually lead more teams to Moldova from my own home church. So I did that for the next 3 years. And all during that time, though, I was learning more about human trafficking, yes, as a global issue, but also as a United States issue, and more specifically as a North Carolina issue, and began to feel more called to work locally. As I'm learning that it's happening here in Eastern North Carolina, and as best I could tell, no one was really addressing it at that time. And so I and a few colleagues decided, well, we need to educate people. So we had a couple of community forums in the Greenville area that were frankly not very well attended. You say we're going to have a forum and talk about human trafficking. It's just like saying we're going to have one and talk about domestic violence or child abuse. People don't want to talk about that. So we thought, well, what can we do? How can we get people interested? And so we decided to have a walk, because I don't know about here, but in our area, there is a walk or a run every weekend. And so we decided to have one and thought that we could use that as a tool to, come to our human trafficking walk, and they could ask us what human trafficking was, and we could talk to them about it. And so we did that, and it was very well attended. We got good press, so we began to get the word out there. And I thought, okay, God, I'm done. I did what you asked me to do. But no, we realized there was much work to be done, that was actually a beginning. And so over a period of time, what eventually happened is that we organized into a nonprofit in 2010. And so since that time, a primary piece of what we do is education. So we speak to church groups, to civic groups. We go into schools, universities, and community colleges and do general human trafficking awareness. My real passion, though, is talking to people who might actually encounter human trafficking in the course of their jobs, so doing more professional training. So we train healthcare professionals, law enforcement, social workers, teachers, counselors. We go into hotels and train hotel staff. So that's become a big part of what we do. Of course, we're also very much aware that human trafficking is such a huge issue that it's not something that any one person or any one organization can address alone. And so we think collaboration is really important. We're a part of a statewide group called the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking. And until recently, I was on their board of directors. And we gained so much value from that statewide group and from all the different parts of different communities that would come. The law enforcement, the social workers, the direct service providers, the faith community, all coming together to address the issue. And I thought, we really need that on a local level in Pitt County. And so we started the Pitt County Coalition Against Human Trafficking. And it has just gained so much support from the community. It has just been beautiful to watch. One of the things that the coalition does every year is to really try to educate the community about Human Trafficking Awareness Month. One of the ways we do that is we invite all the municipalities in the county to sign a proclamation that January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And it's, it serves a couple of different purposes. One is, of course, getting the word out, publicity. And we send a Pitt County Coalition Against Human Trafficking member to each of the January board meetings for the municipalities to have the proclamation signed and receive it, but to share information about the public that's there about the issue of human trafficking. So we've been busy all week going to the Pitt County Commissioners meeting, and then the Greenville City Council meeting, and then the other smaller municipalities in our county, to create awareness among the leadership, but then also, like I said, the members of the public who are there as well. One of the goals of our coalition and just the human trafficking movement in general is to help get communities involved, community members. It seems that there's this idea that's pretty pervasive among people that they should mind their own business, that they shouldn't get involved with things. And we're trying to change that perception in our community. One of the ways we're doing that is we're showing a documentary coming up later this month. It's called Be the One. And the whole idea behind it is it's showing human trafficking cases that the victims were rescued and the perpetrators were arrested because a community member was aware and knew signs to look for and was willing to make a call. And that's the idea we're trying to communicate to our community as well as statewide, that you don't have to be a law enforcement officer. You don't have to be a social worker. You can just have your eyes open. And if you see something that doesn't look right and doesn't feel right, I always tell them to do a gut check, to make that call. And, if you make a call and it turns out it's not human trafficking, hallelujah.
Yeah. Celebrate. Yeah.
But, no one's going to be mad. Law enforcement's not going to be mad if you make a call and it's not human trafficking. But just think you could save someone's life if you're willing to make that call.
I guess a key question here is why does people, or in your experience, why does people hesitate and not make that call, or hesitate and think, quote, and I know you've heard this before, I don't want to get involved.
Exactly.
Or, sadly, it's not my problem.
Right. I don't know. I think, I don't know why that is. I can tell you it's pervasive. I can give you an example from here in North Carolina. Some of your viewers may have heard last year there was a case in Cumberland County of a church minister who had, members that lived on a compound, and he had several businesses that he owned, one of which was a fish market. And not only were members of his church, required to work in these businesses that he owned, but children who were supposed to be in school were working in these businesses. And I use that case as an example when I do trainings, especially in the community, because I'll tell the attendees about how, these kids are required to work in the fish market and they're having to cut up fish and carry these big crates. And of course, the person I hold responsible is, the minister and his colleagues. I'll say, but who else I hold responsible? Anybody who went in that fish market to buy fish.
Thousands of people.
And saw these children in there working at these obviously inappropriate jobs on school days, and nobody made the call? How could that possibly be? And so, that's something that, again, as our coalition is striving to educate the community, one of the things we want to tell them is, you need to get involved. It is your job.
We're going to have to take a break, and we're going to come right back. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for being with us. We're talking with Pam Strickland. We're talking about something not only is the nature of
Experiencing slow internet? If you have a fast internet package, the problem is most likely your wireless router. With more devices using Wi-Fi, your wireless router may not be able to deliver the speed and coverage you need. We now have the leading solution to enhance your internet experience. Using small devices in a mesh network, these Wi-Fi appliances cover just about any size home so that all your devices can operate to their fullest potential. Whole home Wi-Fi from Star Communications. Get the most out of your internet connection.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on there. Again, I want to thank you for being with us today. I want to ask you to continue to send your suggestions, comments, questions, whatever, to we should know edu@gmail.com. We should know edu@gmail.com. And I do appreciate your suggestions on programs and shows that we've put together in the past. You are kind of our lifeline of learning more about what some of the things you want to hear about. One of those things that we're doing today is basically talking about something that is sad, Pam Strickland, that we have to talk about these things and make people aware of people that is literally being held in slavery is what it amounts to, both consciously or unconsciously, in the sense of understanding that's what it is. As we went off air, you were talking about Cumberland County, which is right next door to us. We have listeners in Cumberland County, viewers and so forth. And so when we look at that, is there a sense that oftentimes with human trafficking that these things become the acceptable norm rather than something's wrong?
I think that's true. I think in that case, for example, that people thought, well, it's right here out in the open, so they must not be doing anything illegal, yeah, exactly. I'm thinking. And also when we talk about the idea of sexualizing our young people, which is one of the areas that people most often want to hear about is sex trafficking. And there is this conception among a lot of people that how this happens, how someone gets involved in sex trafficking is they're kidnapped, they're shoved into a white van, and it drives away, and they're taken somewhere and forced into prostitution. And of course that happens, okay? But that is not the normal way that people get involved in sex trafficking. Typically it's someone that they know. a friend, someone pretending to be a boyfriend that will develop a relationship with a young person and may devote months into the grooming process to get that person's trust, to convince them that they're in a real relationship, a real boyfriend-girlfriend relationship. Initially, there might be gifts, and there's this kind of honeymoon period, like in many relationships. And then once that trust is built, the trafficker may say something like, well, I've gotten behind on the bills, and I really need some help. I know a way that you can help. And, it wouldn't be for long. It would just be until we get caught up. Will you do this for me, for us? And the victim wants to preserve this relationship, doesn't like the idea, but it's temporary. They agree to it. So very often it's not that they're initially forced into prostitution. Very often they're manipulated into it.
Kind of low-level coercion. So
exactly. And so they go into it somewhat willingly, but then they realize, this was supposed to be temporary. I want out of this. And that's when the force comes in, where the trafficker will say, oh no, you're making us too much money. You can't stop now. And if you stop, bad things are going to happen. Not only to you, but to your family. We know where they are. So one of the things that our organization works hard to do is to dispel this myth that it's all about kidnapping and all about force. We need for both young people and their parents and the teachers and counselors, coaches that work with our young people to sort of be on the lookout for older people, typically males. I hesitate to say, that because all traffickers are not men and all victims are not female. That's the majority.
Right.
So if you see, older guys wooing these teenage girls, that's a red flag all by itself. So that's one of the things, like I said, we're trying to educate people about, is to be on the lookout for that. Another way that young people get in a human trafficking situation is by meeting people over the internet. And it's a similar thing where the trafficker may, again, invest weeks and months into developing this online relationship to develop trust, and then convince that person to actually meet them in person, or convince them to run away with them, or that kind of thing. And sometimes it involves encouraging what is really very normal teenage behavior. When they're having a fight with their parent, and instead of saying, well, all parents are like that, and having what I would call a normal conversation, instead they would be encouraging, well, they shouldn't treat you like that.
Destructive coaching kind of technique.
Serve them right if you left, and that kind of thing to encourage them to leave. So one of the things that we do is go into schools, and we have a prevention outreach program where we go in and we talk to young people about what a healthy relationship looks like, both a healthy romantic relationship as well as healthy friendships, because we've got this, again, in our culture, this idea that being a snitch is like the worst possible thing you can be. But what we're trying to encourage teenagers, young people in general, if you know that one of your friends is sneaking off to see this much older guy and, you're concerned about it, the best thing you can do is to be more concerned about your friend's safety than your friendship. Because, yes, it might make them mad if you tell their parents, but it might save their life, too.
And I think the disturbing part about what you're explaining, it seems to be that once that child finds themselves in that environment, and as you just so vividly pointed out, that all of a sudden they become not only almost impossible to get out, but they become part of the environment, and they're so ashamed and they're so embarrassed that they feel like it's, quote, their fault. Is that a correct assumption on that?
Definitely, and the trafficker is always reinforcing that this was your choice.
You made that decision.
I didn't make you do anything. And so that's part of the way that they keep them in the situation, because if the victim ever does make any noise about leaving or going to law enforcement or anything like that, well, then the trafficker says, well, they're not going to believe you. You know, you did this of your own free will. And what many times ends up happening is that these victims do end up with a record, you know, with prostitution charges, for instance, or the trafficker will require them to break other laws while the victim's under his control. Transporting drugs, selling drugs, shoplifting, assault even. In Pitt County, we had a big case where the trafficker required the victim to pass counterfeit money, which turned out to be a blessing, because when they passed the counterfeit money, that's how they got rescued. They got caught passing the counterfeit money, and turned out this was a runaway from New York that was being trafficked out of a hotel across from this Dollar Tree.
Right here in Eastern North Carolina?
Yes, yes. So that's another one of the points we try to educate people about is, you know, these victims get labeled bad people because they get all these multiple arrests on their record. And then when they are trying to get out, they want to go to school, they want to get a legitimate job, they've got this record that's following them around. And as our current statutes are written, there's not a lot of relief for that. They can get one prostitution charge expunged. Well, normally they're going to have multiple prostitution charges as well as other charges, but currently there's no statute that allows for them to get these other charges expunged or any more than one prostitution charge. So that's something that we and some other groups across the state are hoping to work with our legislature about.
We have such a huge population now, particularly in Eastern North Carolina, and I know you're aware of this, and I'm not trying to pick on any one particularly subgroup, if you will, but there's a lot of folks that work in Eastern North Carolina that they're very strong family-oriented people, and they come from various parts of the world, if you will. And part of this is an immigration issue, part of it is not, but the reality is there's a lot of folks that maybe simply don't know anything about our laws, that simply are here and they find themselves in these kinds of tragic situations that could be 4, 5, 6, or 7. You know, I've seen a couple of articles that says that since 2011, the increase in human trafficking with females has gone up 40+%. That's just the ones we know about. What's driving that? Is it the internet? Is it the influx of people? Is it the fact that we're not doing a good job in reporting these things? What is all that? What is driving that, I guess, demand for that market?
Well, first of all, the increase in number of reports may not necessarily indicate an increase in actual human trafficking activity.
It'd be a lot more.
It's we believe that part of that increase would be increased awareness, and that's why there's an increase in reports. So there may not actually be an increase in number. But to answer your question about what drives demand, one of the things that we talk about a lot is and I mentioned this briefly earlier, the over-sexualization of our young people. And one of the things that we believe is really contributing to demand is the easy accessibility of pornography, especially to our young people. As you know, when I was a kid and you were a kid, pornography was, you know, a Playboy magazine that you found hidden in your big brother's bedroom or something. And now we've got hardcore porn that can be on any device that any young person has, and they're using it as sex ed. So the idea is that they're learning from watching porn is that people are objects to be used, and that you know, sex isn't a part of a beautiful and healthy relationship. Sex is an end unto itself, and when you get those kinds of ideas, then the idea of buying sex, you know, that's not a very big leap from there. So I think that the increase in pornography use certainly has contributed to demand, and just the general idea that it's okay to buy people, that it's okay to objectify people in that way, certainly contributes to demand.
We're going to take another break. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Pam Strickland, and believe it or not, we're talking about buying and selling people. human trafficking. It's Human Trafficking Awareness Month.
You come out to replace a bad sensor, and that adds a 5-year commitment to my contract, and you don't tell me? Here's your sign.
Switch to the sign that's keeping homes secure and customers happy all over the area. Security from Star Communications. We pride ourselves on fair pricing and quick, friendly service every time.
Somebody try to break into this place?
Security from Star Communications.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. We're talking about a very heavy-weighted subject, something that should touch you, cause you to think deeply about what's going on around you in your life. We're talking about a subject that is called human trafficking. We have Pam Strickland with us. She heads up an organization called Eastern North Carolina Human Trafficking, ENC, Eastern North Carolina Stop Human Trafficking Now. Pam, you've been doing this for over a decade. Just in our first half, we got into some very weighted subjects about this. It can help if you're a human being to kind of touch your heart, no matter how calloused you may be, when you talk about people that is literally bought and sold for the purpose of nothing but sex slaves, and it's happening, as you've pointed out, literally under our nose.
Yes, I wanted to get back to one of the things you mentioned earlier, is the idea of immigration and how that might be related to the issue of human trafficking. Here in North Carolina, of course, we have a very, very high immigrant population due to our agricultural industry primarily. And as a result, labor trafficking is something that we certainly have to be aware of in the entire state, but especially in the eastern part of the state. We had a speaker at our Pitt County Coalition meeting a couple of months ago from Legal Aid of North Carolina. And she came and talked to us about there being an increase in cases of labor exploitation and labor trafficking in eastern North Carolina, where recruiters would require workers who wanted to come to North Carolina to work to pay these large fees, and then once they get here, so they're in debt, and rather than working their way out of debt, the debt gets added to because they're forced to, buy food and other necessities from the company truck, so to speak, and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I want, your audience to be very much aware that those are definitely unseen victims. I mean, they're in these migrant labor camps that are up a dirt road that none of us are ever going to encounter. So we need to be aware that even though we may not be directly involved in human trafficking, that just the way our economy operates, that all of us benefit in some way from it. One of the things I wanted to mention too is that when we talk about the labor camps and immigration, it's not just labor trafficking. There was a case in Wilson County back last summer that you may remember hearing about, where several adults would take this teenage girl around. They would give her drugs, and then they would take her to migrant labor camps in Wilson County, where these migrant laborers would line up to abuse this young woman. And so we've also heard cases where female farm workers would be required to work in the field during the day and then service their male co-workers at night. So many times the sex trafficking and the labor trafficking do sort of overlap. So just wanted people to be aware that it's not as separate as many times we might want to think it is.
Does it add to that when folks maybe are in this country, they don't understand, don't speak the language, they don't understand the environment, they may be in that captive kind of situation, and they really don't have a trust for anybody. So they don't know, even if they decide, well, I'm just leaving, the question is often asked, where do they go? I mean, what do they do? Is there a refuge somewhere? Is there somebody that's willing to listen? Or do we just kind of cast them out as part of a lost population? It's really sad, and it's almost, and I say this from just my perspective, but it just seems to be totally against all the doctrines of Christianity.
Yes, I think you're right. And what many people fail to realize, they group all of these people, all of the immigrants, into a category and call them all illegals. What I like to share with people is that North Carolina brings in more farm laborers through the farm worker visa program than any other state in the country. And last time I checked, between 9,000 and 10,000 a year. And those people, even coming here legally and trying to do things the right way, are so incredibly vulnerable because they are tied to the farmer who got them the visa. People don't really seem to understand how that works. So if I'm a farmer and I need 100 workers this summer, I apply through the Department of Labor and all this paperwork gets done. My 100 workers show up, their visa is tied to me. So if I force them to work in fields that I've just sprayed with pesticide, or if I don't provide the housing I'm supposed to provide with the right number of toilets and showers and access to cooking and that kind of thing, if I don't do that, they really don't have a recourse. Now, you and I are sitting here going, well, of course they have a recourse. They could go to law enforcement. They could go to the Department of Labor. Well, let's be real. Okay, they're down this dirt road I mentioned before. Even if they could get to civilization and find law enforcement office, they wouldn't. Most of them are from Mexico and other South and Central American countries, primarily Mexico. The law enforcement in their home country is incredibly corrupt. They don't trust law enforcement there. And so they're in a different country where they don't speak the language, they don't know the culture, they don't know anyone. They're certainly not going to trust our law enforcement. So they don't have any legal recourse. They can either stay there and take the bad treatment, go home, or go down the road and work for another farmer, at which point they've gone off the grid and now they're illegal, whereas when they came, they were legal. So I just like to try to help people understand that they're just incredibly vulnerable no matter which road they take.
And it sounds like what you're saying is that these things are connected one to the other, and there's not a simple, finite solution. If you do A, then everything's solved. It's just not that simple. So the complexity of it also adds to the gravity of the kind of horrific part, which you pointed out, which is the sex trafficking, which is the, quote, and I'll use the word slavery issue, where people don't simply have a choice. Now, whether that is out of lack of knowledge and understanding on their part, does it come down to a point that would be made that either you are part of the problem or you're part of the solution? Is that basically what we're talking about?
Yes, I think educating our agricultural industry more about this issue would be helpful. And the reason I say that is so many times the owners, the farmers, aren't involved with the day-to-day management of the farms. They have people who run it for them and may not even be aware of how workers get recruited and how they're getting treated. And so I would just ask for the leaders in our agricultural industry to maybe pay some more attention to that, to look into how farms are being managed and whether or not just basic humanitarian needs are being met. Another example back during Florence, we have, there were videos on the news of migrant workers who were not evacuated and who were left in these buildings that, they're on the roof, and they had called 911 saying, we need to be evacuated, and had been overruled by, there's much doubt about who. Yeah. Crew leader or someone said, oh no, we've got everyone out that needs to get out. And so these people were left abandoned. So yes, I think that to get leadership in our industry involved, to get farm owners more involved in, exactly what is going on in the land, in the farming of the land that I own.
And I know that going forward, and I'll go ahead and say this on the air, I'll get calls and I'll get people stopping me that are good people that I know that are farmers and go, look, we don't do that and you need to tell that lady blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, I understand that, and I do understand we've got a lot of folks. And again, I think the side that I'm particularly looking at here is maybe that unknown side, that piece, because if most of the folks I know that are in agricultural business, if they know of something like that, they're going to take some kind of action. So what I'm hearing you say is, look, maybe you need to look a little bit deeper, double check, see what's really going on. It may be there's too much attention paid just to that person bringing the folks to the farm and not having communication beyond that. And a lot of people will then respond to me, Pam, and I'm going to be right honest. They'll say, well, that's not our job. I mean, you know, we've done everything we're supposed to do. We met the visa guidelines. We've work visas is all signed off on. Now, if they get into A, B, C, or D, then that's up to them. So we do get back to that idea. Are we part of the problem or are we part of the solution? So how do we get to that without creating a huge pushback somewhere?
Right, and I get that too.
Yeah.
I spoke to a group a few months ago, and the gentleman stood up and said, "I've been farming for 40 years, and I've never done anything like that."
That's right, exactly.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah. And you know, it's not that you're saying that. I don't think.
Right.
You're saying that these oftentimes are some of the ways these things happen and bleed into the environment.
Sure, and we know it's going on. So, how is it continuing to be hidden? You know, is it that our friends and neighbors who are being conscientious and doing a good job need to apply some positive peer pressure, perhaps, to some of their colleagues? You know, there are, you know, associations of farm owners. Maybe they need to have some standards that they hold one another to. And like you said, look deeper and not say, well, I've hired the manager, that's the manager's job. You know, it can come back to you, the owner. So it would behoove you to find out how things are being handled on the ground.
Okay. We're going to take another break and we'll come back and do some added information here, maybe that'll help people in the future and know where to get additional information as well. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about a key issue. It's Human Awareness or Human Trafficking Awareness Month, January. We're talking with Pam Strickland, somebody who knows a lot about this subject.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on there again, coming to you from Star Communications Channel 16, WCLN Radio. There's a summation of the Sampson Weekly newspaper. You can also pick us up on Tuesday at mixler.com/oldies1170. Audio piece will be on Tuesday, every Tuesday at 2:30 with a new subject, new content, things that you need to be aware of today. We've been talking about, for this segment, we've been talking about human trafficking and the fact that January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. Who better to talk to than Pam Strickland, who heads up the Eastern North Carolina Stop Human Trafficking Now program, and a great website if folks want to go to that website. I mean, they could Google it or pull it up or what have you, but you just have an abundant amount of information on there, Pam, and I congratulate you on championing this cause and moving forward with it, but you have ramped up the education piece dramatically in Eastern North Carolina, and I want to mention a bill that was signed, $430 million bill that was signed by the President, that was put in play by Representative Chris Smith from New Jersey. Apparently there is, not only in Eastern North Carolina, but in the United States and in the world, there is simply put, an awareness of the need to do something about human trafficking, because it cuts to the core of who we are as human beings, as decency, as not so much correctness, but it's just what our moral core is. With that said, and when we look at that amount of money, some of that's going to something called the trafficking-free supply chain. So it's almost like you know, you look at it from the sense there's a supply chain for pineapples or bananas, and I hate to use this analogy, but there's also a supply chain apparently for human trafficking of human beings that go in and out and move around, and it's a dark underworld. Talk about that for us.
Yes, so one of the issues that the human trafficking movement is trying to get people more educated about is this idea of a transparent supply chain. And what that means is we have companies here in the United States who are buying products that are made overseas. And they will say that they have very little knowledge or control over how their products are being made overseas. And it has been discovered that many times in other countries they have different standards for labor practices than here. In fact, in other countries, we actually find examples of state-run labor trafficking where they will shut down regular industry, for instance, during the cotton harvest period. And it doesn't matter that you're a teacher or you're a lawyer or you're a doctor. It's cotton harvest time and everybody stops and that's what you have to do. So the idea of a transparent supply chain says, don't tell me, okay, I bought it from ABC Company in Detroit and part of it, ABC Company got part of it from somewhere in New York and it got to New York from somewhere in Asia. And that's a black hole. We don't know what happened there.
I really don't want to.
Exactly. So the idea is to have people be more responsible about their subcontractors and their suppliers and where items are being made and under what conditions they're being made. I said earlier that we all benefit from human trafficking, whether we're aware of it or not. And that's one of the things that I meant is that when we go into a store and, even if we're trying to be a conscious consumer and we look at labels, we can't tell. We can tell what country usually a product was made in, but we have no idea under what circumstances they were made. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that our nonprofit talks to people about is the idea of being a conscious consumer, and more specifically, the idea of purchasing items that are fair trade certified. And I should have brought a picture of the logo with me. Mm-hmm. It's a logo that you can actually find in your local grocery store. And the most common products that you could find would be coffee, tea, chocolate. You can look for a little logo. And so for people who want to help and aren't going to start a nonprofit, don't know what they can do, one easy thing to do would be to switch to fair trade coffee. Because if you buy coffee that's fair trade certified, you know that the people who made it were paid a fair living wage. So this idea that we're sort of all involved in it, that's what I mean by that, is that we're buying products every day that were made by exploited labor. And unfortunately, the way our economy works, there's not a lot we can do about that. I decided at one point that I was not going to buy anything made in China because of the forced labor situation there. Well, that lasted like 2 days. Yeah. You can't do that. Yeah. Even if you try, you can't do that.
It's all but impossible.
So what I would encourage your audience to do is to look up Fair Trade Certified. They can look up fairtradeusa.org. And I live in a little bitty town called Farmville, population 4,700. And our local Food Lion has multiple fair trade products. Mm-hmm. When you go to a Harris Teeter or you go to a Fresh Market, they all have them. So the idea is that we can help in little ways. If you can't do a grand thing, you can help in a little way. And I would encourage your audience to consider that.
When you again, I want to back up just a bit on the agricultural piece too, because I know I'm going to get contacted about it. When you have a farmer or agribusiness person that says, "Look, I follow all the state and federal guidelines. I do everything I'm supposed to do. I'm running on a small margin, profit margin. I want to clear the air that I know I'm not, and I know feel confident you're not. We're not saying that agriculture is doing anything wrong or you're criminals or anything of that nature. We're just saying that sometimes things slip through the crack. Kind of help us clarify that a bit, because knowing personally, knowing a lot of these folks, I know who they are, and it's those saying it's what they're made of and that kind of thing, and they would never do anything to even resemble that. But at the same time, these things goes on sometimes, and folks don't know what's happening in the background. Everything might look good paperwork-wise, but what I hear you saying is in the background sometimes things might be happening that they would have no way of knowing.
Right.
So where does that catalyst come in? And I guess maybe at this point I want to try to segue in before we get through today, so you can talk to us a bit about what do we look for? What is at the local Walmart or Food Line or what have you? What are things that should cause us to be concerned or cause us to even think about picking up that phone or dialing that number and saying, hey, I'm at so-and-so and so, and something looks very suspicious here? What are some of those things, those little things that you, as a professional is for over a decade, see that we might not see?
So some of the things that we can look for just in our everyday lives would be employees that live and work at the same place. So for instance, if you have a restaurant where the employees work all day and then they all go upstairs and sleep in the same apartment. Or a nail salon where they all arrive together in a van, they work all day, they all leave together in a van. So, there could be good explanations for that. That's not, I always tell people, I don't have a checklist. If A, B, and C are true, then it's human trafficking. What we have are some things that we call red flags, that you look at the totality of the situation, and then again, you do a gut check, right? So if you're in a nail salon and they all come together in a van and they all leave together in a van, and at that same nail salon, the employees seem anxious or nervous, seem even more so when, say, the manager's around, perhaps don't speak good English. If every time you go, there's different people there, they don't have a consistent staff. Those are some red flags. And again, if it just doesn't feel right, make that call. Same thing with restaurants. If either they all arrive together and leave together, or again, how they, their demeanor around people in general, but specifically around the boss, if they seem anxious or nervous, that would be something. If you're out in a restaurant, mall situation, and there's an older guy and a younger girl that doesn't appear to be a father-daughter situation, and the young person just seems very anxious, is kind of pulling away, while the other person is kind of tugging them, towards them.
Body language.
Yeah. If they're not allowed to speak for themselves, if this other person always, I ask you a question, and instead of you answering, then the person with you answers, or you don't even try to answer. You're used to not being able to answer. You just defer to someone else answering for you. Those would be some things that you could look for.
Folks want to get up with you and reach out and say, hey, I've got a question, or I'd like to get somebody to come from your organization and speak to a church group, what have you. How do they reach you?
The easiest thing to do would be to contact our website, because we've got a contact us on there, and that's www.encstophumantrafficking.org.
Okay.
And we would be glad to come and speak to groups, to businesses, churches.
And they can just schedule, go on there and put that information.
Yes.
We're kind of coming to the end. I want to make sure that we get everything touched on that you want to cover today. And I know you've got a lot of things coming up in January. I'll give you about 30 seconds here to hit that right fast.
Well, one thing that we like to do is have a session we call Human Trafficking 101 at least once a quarter. So we've got one of those on January 24th, and you can get all the details for that from our website. But I would just like to say to your viewers that human trafficking is a big, scary issue, but don't let that deter you from thinking you could make a difference. Keeping your eyes open, being willing to make a call, and doing something as simple as changing your coffee to fair trade coffee.
Again, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us, and maybe in the future we can get you to come back and at least clarify some of those phone calls I know I'll get. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. We Should Know special program today dealing with human trafficking, a subject we don't like to talk about, but we must talk about and be aware of. We look forward to seeing you again next week. And as always, as we close our show, we say to you...
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.